The digital parking meter read 9:47 a.m. when Marcus Thompson closed the door of his black sedan. The February sun in Charleston, South Carolina, created a dramatic contrast between shadows and light filtering through government buildings. Marcus adjusted his leather briefcase and took a deep breath. He didn't like cutting it close, but this morning had been unavoidable. As a federal prosecutor specializing in financial crimes, Marcus lived by a strict code of punctuality and preparation. However, that day he received an urgent call about a money laundering case that required his immediate attention. Now he was heading to Charleston Municipal Court for something completely different, a dispute over a traffic citation he considered unjust. 3 weeks earlier, Marcus had received a speeding ticket in an area where he was certain he had respected the speed limits. Traffic cameras had recorded his vehicle, but Marcus had gathered evidence demonstrating a malfunction in the measurement system. As a lawyer, he knew he had the right to contest the fine, and as a citizen, he felt obligated to do so. Dressed in a charcoal gray suit and an impeccable white shirt, Marcus climbed the steps of the Judicial building. His phone vibrated once more. It was his assistant reminding him of an important meeting at 11 a.m. He would have enough time if everything went according to plan. The interior of the municipal court was a completely different world from the federal courts where Marcus usually worked. The beige walls needed a fresh coat of paint. The plastic seats showed years of intensive use, and the air carried the characteristic aroma of institutional coffee and aged documents. Despite its modest appearance, the place buzzed with activity. Citizens with folders under their arms, lawyers reviewing last-minute notes, and court employees moving with the efficiency of those who knew every corner of the system. Marcus checked his watch, 9:52 a.m. The session began at 10 o'clock, so technically he wasn't late. He followed the signs until he found Courtroom 3, where a golden plaque read, Judge Robert Caldwell. The name wasn't familiar to him, but that wasn't unusual. Municipal and federal judges rarely cross professional paths. Upon entering the courtroom, Marcus noticed several people were already waiting. He found a seat in the third row and opened his briefcase to review his documentation once more. He had copies of camera calibration records, expert testimony on common failures in those systems, and legal precedents that supported his case. It was more preparation than necessary for a simple traffic fine, but Marcus believed in doing things correctly. While organizing his documents, he discreetly observed the other people in the room. An elderly woman nervously reviewed some wrinkled papers. A young man in jeans and a t-shirt looked at his phone with a worried expression. Several businessmen leafed through newspapers, apparently accustomed to these procedures. At 10:05, the bailiff announced the judge's entrance. The entire room stood while a corpulent man of about 60 years, with gray hair combed back and small, calculating eyes, took his place on the bench. Judge Caldwell had an imposing presence that filled the room, and his gaze swept the audience with the precision of a hawk seeking prey. "You may be seated," he said in a deep, authoritative voice. The silence that followed was absolute, as if even the air had decided not to move. The judge began calling cases with mechanical efficiency. Marcus observed with professional attention how the proceedings unfolded. A middle-aged man in a suit approached the podium to dispute a parking fine. His explanation was heard with patience, and he received a 50% reduction in the penalty. An elegant woman appeared for speeding. She explained she was heading to a family medical emergency. The judge nodded understandingly and reduced the fine to a warning. A young professional questioned a fine for not coming to a complete stop at a stop sign. He presented photographs of the location and argued about the sign's visibility. The judge reviewed the images and dismissed the fine completely. Marcus took mental notes. The judge seemed fair and willing to listen to reasonable arguments. This gave him confidence about his own case. At approximately 10:35, he heard his name, Marcus Thompson, case number 2024-TR 8847. Marcus stood and walked to the podium with the confidence of someone who had spent years arguing cases in courtrooms. He placed his documentation on the podium and addressed the judge with professional respect. "Good morning, Your Honor. I'm here to contest the speeding citation I received on January 15th. But something immediately changed in Judge Caldwell's expression. His eyes narrowed slightly and his posture became more rigid. The atmosphere in the room transformed in an almost palpable way. "I see you arrived late, Mr. Thompson," the judge said with a noticeably colder tone than he had used with previous cases. Marcus frowned, confused. "Your Honor, I arrived before 10 a.m. The session began at 10:05. Punctuality means arriving with sufficient time to prepare adequately," the judge replied severely. "Your tardiness shows disrespect for this court." Marcus felt a wave of confusion and something deeper, a familiar but uncomfortable sensation. He quickly looked toward the audience, remembering that several of the previous cases had arrived after him, but none had been reprimanded for tardiness. "Your Honor, respectfully, I believe there was a misunderstanding. I arrived within the established schedule and—" "Don't interrupt me." Judge Caldwell cut him off brusquely. "Your defiant attitude confirms exactly what I suspected about you." Marcus's heart began to beat faster. As a federal prosecutor, he had seen discrimination before, but experiencing it directly was different. He maintained his professional composure, but his mind began processing what was happening. "Your Honor, I'm simply trying to explain." "Additional fine of $200 for contempt," the judge declared, striking his gavel. "And now, regarding your original citation." Marcus breathed deeply. The situation had escalated beyond reasonable, but he decided to continue with his original case, hoping the facts would prevail. "Your Honor, I have evidence that demonstrates the speed measurement system was defective on the day in question." He began to open his folder, but the judge interrupted him again. "Are you questioning the accuracy of our law enforcement equipment?" "I'm presenting technical evidence that suggests a malfunction, Your Honor. It's my legal right." "Your legal right," the judge repeated with evident sarcasm, "doesn't include coming to my court with an arrogant attitude and elaborate excuses." Marcus felt the air thickening around him. The faces in the audience showed a mixture of discomfort and morbid fascination. Some seemed surprised by the treatment he was receiving. Others looked away as if they had seen this before. If you're enjoying this story and want to keep seeing how this injustice unfolds, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the outcome. "Your Honor," Marcus said, maintaining a measured tone, "I have brought technical documentation, legal precedents, and expert testimony. I respectfully request to be allowed to present my case." Judge Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with an expression he hadn't shown with any other defendant that morning. "Original fine confirmed in full, $350. Additional fine for contempt, $200. Additional fine for tardiness, $150. Total, $700. The gavel fell with a sound that resonated in the room like a gunshot. Marcus remained motionless for a moment, processing what had just happened. The injustice was so flagrant, so obvious, that almost seemed surreal. He looked at the faces in the audience. Some showed genuine shock, others a resignation that suggested they had witnessed similar scenes before. "Anything else to say, Mr. Thompson?" the judge asked with a cold smile. Marcus closed his folder slowly. Part of him wanted to leave, pay the fines, and move on with his life. But another part, the part that had dedicated his career to seeking justice, couldn't let it go. "Your Honor," Marcus said with clear, firm voice, "before I leave, I think it's important that you know exactly who you've been talking to." Something in his tone made Judge Caldwell straighten slightly. The room fell into complete silence. Marcus slowly took out his wallet and extracted his official identification. He raised it high enough to be visible not only to the judge, but to the entire room. "My name is Marcus Thompson, and I am Assistant Federal Prosecutor for the Southern District of South Carolina, United States Department of Justice." The change in atmosphere was instant and dramatic. Judge Caldwell turned pale, his eyes fixed on the identification, as if it were a venomous snake. Murmurs ran through the audience like waves in a pond. I have worked for the past 12 years prosecuting cases of corruption, abuse of power, and civil rights violations, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. And what I just experienced here constitutes a clear violation of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The judge tried to regain his composure. Mr. Thompson, if there's any misunderstanding— There's no misunderstanding, Your Honor, Marcus interrupted. I have mentally documented every detail of this interaction. The contrast between how you treated previous defendants and how you treated me is so evident it borders on criminal negligence. Marcus put away his identification, but maintained his authoritative posture. As a public servant who is sworn to defend justice, I have the moral and legal obligation to report what I have witnessed here today. Judge Caldwell attempted a forced smile. Mr. Thompson, I'm sure we can resolve any mistaken perceptions. The only mistaken perception, Marcus responded, was assuming you could discriminate with impunity against someone based solely on their appearance. The tension in the room was palpable. Some spectators had begun discreetly taking out their phones. The court clerk typed nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding before his eyes. Marcus picked up his briefcase. Your Honor, I had decided not to appeal these ridiculous fines. Instead, I will pay them in full, because they will be perfect evidence of the systematic discrimination operating in this court. He headed toward the exit, but stopped and turned one last time. And you can be sure this doesn't end here. The Department of Justice will be very interested in reviewing this court's sentencing patterns, particularly how they differ according to the defendant's race. Marcus left the room, leaving sepulchral silence behind. In the hallway, several people who had been in the audience caught up with him. A middle-aged African-American woman approached timidly. Excuse me, Mr. Thompson. What just happened in there? I've seen that before. My son received a $500 fine for the same thing that cost a white boy $50. An older man nodded. I work maintenance here. I've seen Judge Caldwell for years. What you experienced isn't unusual, but no one had ever had the credentials to do something about it. Marcus took out his business card. If any of you have experienced discriminatory treatment in this court, I ask that you contact me. It's time for this to stop. Back in his federal office, Marcus immediately began to work. His first call was to the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General. His second was to the Civil Rights Division. The third was to a colleague specialized in institutional discrimination. During the following 2 weeks, Marcus meticulously built his case. He requested records of all Judge Caldwell sentences during the past 5 years. The patterns that emerged were overwhelming and statistically impossible to explain as coincidence. African-American defendants received fines 340% higher than whites for identical infractions. The fine reduction rate for white defendants was 78%, while for black defendants it was 12%. Contempt cases for defiant attitude were applied to African-American defendants at a ratio of 15-1 compared to white defendants. But the numbers were only part of the story. Marcus began receiving calls and emails from dozens of people who had experienced similar treatment. Each testimony added another piece to the mosaic of systematic discrimination. Sarah Williams, a 34-year-old nurse, had received a $600 fine for a parking infraction that normally cost $75. When she questioned the amount, she was charged with contempt and fined additionally. James Patterson, a high school teacher, had been treated so rudely over a simple traffic fine that he had developed anxiety about any interaction with the judicial system. Maria Gonzalez, a public defender, had noticed the discriminatory patterns but had never been able to document them formally due to the nature of her work. The story began to leak to local media, then national. Federal prosecutor exposes discrimination in municipal court became headlines in newspapers across the country. Social media amplified the story with hashtags like #EqualJustice and #NoMoreDiscrimination. Judge Caldwell initially denied all accusations, but the statistical evidence was overwhelming. A formal state investigation revealed not only the discriminatory patterns, but also financial irregularities in how fines were handled and where the collected money went. 3 months after the initial incident, Marcus received a call from his supervisor. "Judge Caldwell has resigned," he announced, "and the state has agreed to implement comprehensive reforms throughout the municipal court system." The reforms were extensive: independent oversight of sentences, mandatory training and implicit bias for all judges and court personnel, and a review system that allowed citizens to report discriminatory treatment anonymously and safely. But for Marcus, the most significant change was personal. His experience had transformed his perspective on justice from abstract to viscerally personal. He began dedicating part of his time to speaking at law schools about systematic discrimination and the importance of challenging injustice from positions of privilege and power. At a conference at the University of South Carolina, a student asked him what he had learned from the entire experience. "I learned that discrimination doesn't always come with white robes and burning crosses," Marcus responded. "Sometimes it comes dressed in judicial robes and hidden behind institutional respectability. But I also learned that one person in the right position at the right moment can generate waves of change that extend far beyond what they ever imagined." Charleston's Municipal Court was completely renovated. A new judge, the Honorable Patricia Wilson, known for her commitment to equity, took office. A plaque was installed at the building's entrance that read, "Justice is blind to color, creed, and economic condition." Marcus framed his $700 in fines, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. He hung them in his office alongside a photo of a new court and thank you letters from people who had found the courage to speak up after his example. A year later, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. The new South Carolina Judicial Reform Association had selected him to receive the Civic Courage Award for his role in exposing and correcting systematic discrimination. In his acceptance speech, Marcus reflected on how a simple day trying to contest a traffic fine had become a catalyst for systematic change. Injustice thrives in silence and in the assumption that that's just how things are, he told the audience filled with judges, lawyers, and activists. "My privilege as a federal prosecutor gave me a platform that others didn't have. But the real power came from recognizing that I had the responsibility to use that platform, not just for my personal benefit, but for all those who had suffered in silence." Marcus Thompson's story became a case study in law schools across the country. His name was mentioned in discussions about judicial ethics and justice system reform. But for him, true success was measured in letters like the one he received from Sarah Williams, the nurse who had been unjustly fined. "Mr. Thompson," she wrote, "my 16-year-old daughter recently asked me what to do when she sees injustice. I showed her your story and told her, doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always necessary. And sometimes one brave person is all it takes to change an entire system." Marcus kept that letter on his desk, along with dozens of similar ones. Each represented not only a life touched by his decision not to stay silent, but a reminder that true justice requires constant vigilance and the courage to act when others remain silent. The case of Marcus Thompson against the discriminatory judicial system had officially closed, but its impact continued reverberating through institutions, communities, and individual hearts, proving that sometimes the most ordinary moments can generate the most extraordinary transformations. If you made it this far and you're interested in learning more stories about justice and civil courage, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.